and then he said, no, police don't drop the knife, and he was...
They were hired to protect, to care, to love. Families opened their doors to them. They handed over their children, their homes, their trust. But trust can be the most dangerous weapon of all. Because sometimes, the ones who hold your baby in their arms are the same ones who will end their life. Tonight, we step into a world of innocence turned inside out, where the hands meant to soothe became instruments of horror. These are the most evil nannies who destroyed families, when trust led to tragedy. New York City, October 2012, the Upper West Side. A place where life feels safe, where the hum of taxis and laughter fills the streets, and where wealth buys peace, or at least the illusion of it. Inside a luxury apartment on West 75th Street, the Krim family lived the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. Kevin and Marina Krim were successful, devoted, and proud parents to 3 children: Lucia, 6, Leo, 2, and baby Nessie, the newest light in their carefully built world. They were warm people, the kind who remembered birthdays, who smiled at strangers, who believed that kindness could make the world better. They hired help not out of privilege, but necessity. Like so many New York families, they needed someone to care for their children when they couldn't. Her name was Yoselyn Ortega, 50 years old, a woman from the Dominican Republic who had come to America for opportunity. Quiet, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of nanny parents dream of finding. She had worked for the Krims for almost 2 years. They trusted her completely. They let her into their home, into their lives. The children called her Josie. They loved her. For a long time, everything seemed normal. Photos from family vacations showed Ortega smiling, holding Lucia's hand, helping Leo tie his shoes. But underneath that smile, something was breaking. Ortega was struggling, money problems, family pressure, a growing sense of resentment. She told her sister that she was tired of cleaning other people's homes, that the Krims have everything and I have nothing. She said Marina was too demanding, that she made her feel small. No one realized how deep that bitterness had grown. On the afternoon of October the 25th, Marina took baby Nessie to swimming lessons. Lucia and Leo stayed behind with Ortega. It was a routine day, nothing out of place. Marina even texted Ortega before leaving. "See you soon," she wrote. "Love you." She came home a few hours later. The apartment was dark. Too dark. She called out, "Josie?" No answer. Then, from the bathroom, she heard water running. She walked closer, her voice soft but uneasy. And when she opened the door, the world she knew ended. Lucia lay in the bathtub, Leo beside her, their tiny bodies still. The water tinged red. And standing over them was Yoselyn Ortega, her face calm, her clothes soaked in blood, a knife in her hand. For a second, time stopped. Marina screamed. Ortega looked at her, then raised the knife and drove it into her own neck. Marina ran into the hallway, her screams echoing down the corridor, calling for help. Neighbors rushed out of their apartments. Someone called 911, but it was already too late. Lucia and Leo were gone. When police arrived, they found a scene so horrific that officers had to step outside to breathe. Detectives described the bathroom as a place no parent should ever see. Ortega was rushed to the hospital. She had survived. Marina was taken to another floor, shaking, repeating her children's names over and over. When Ortega regained consciousness, she said she didn't remember. Later, she said she had been depressed, that she snapped, that she wanted to punish the Krims. But investigators found no psychotic break, no confusion, only rage. Rage that had been quietly simmering for months. In the weeks before the murders, Ortega's sister noticed her behavior changing. She stopped smiling. She complained that Marina expected too much, that she felt invisible. But when the Krims offered help, even offered to pay for therapy, she refused. At trial, her defense team argued insanity. They said she had lost touch with reality, that she was delusional. But prosecutors told a different story. They said she knew exactly what she was doing, that she waited until Marina was gone, that she chose the moment carefully, and that her final act, stabbing herself in the neck, was not an attempt to die, but to avoid accountability. The jury believed the prosecution. In 2018, Yoselyn Ortega was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her sentence, life in prison without parole. When the verdict was read, Marina and Kevin sat together, holding hands. They didn't look at Ortega. There was nothing left to see. In her victim statement, Marina said quietly, "I have no room for hate. Hate would only take away what little I have left of them." After the trial, the Crims started a foundation in memory of Lucia and Leo. Choose creativity, to help families use art to heal from grief. They had lost everything, but somehow they still believed in kindness. Detectives later said it was one of the worst cases they had ever seen, not just for the brutality, but for the betrayal. Because the person who killed those children was the same one who tucked them in at night, the same one their mother had trusted completely. Ortega sits in a cell now, silent, aging, alone. Her name is spoken only in whispers by those who still remember. But for the Crims, her name no longer matters. Only Lucia and Leo do. They were 6 and 2, too young to know evil, too innocent to see it coming. And while New York tried to understand how a caregiver could turn into a killer, across the Atlantic, another young woman was about to learn how one mistake, one reckless moment, could destroy a life forever. Her name was Louise Woodward, Boston, Massachusetts, 1997. A cold winter, a quiet suburb, and a tragedy that would divide two nations. Her name was Louise Woodward, 18 years old, fresh from England, excited to see America, to work as an au pair for a young family in the quiet town of Newton. The Aoppen family, Sunil and Deborah, were both doctors. Busy, professional, and devoted parents to 2 boys, Matthew, 8 months, and Brendan, 2 years. They wanted the best for their children. They wanted help they could trust. Louise was perfect on paper, bright, responsible, and eager to please. She moved into their home, became part of their routine. She took walks with the stroller, read stories, sang nursery rhymes in a soft British accent. The family adored her, but something beneath that cheerful exterior was wearing thin. Louise wasn't prepared for the exhaustion, the pressure, the endless hours that childcare demands. She told friends the work was too much, that she missed home, that sometimes the baby wouldn't stop crying. Little complaints, nothing alarming. But sometimes, a small crack is all it takes for the whole wall to collapse. On February the 4th, 1997, everything changed. At 10 in the morning, Louise was alone in the house with baby Matthew. Sunil and Deborah were both at work. The older child, Brendan, was in daycare. At 10:30, a frantic call came through to 911. Louise's voice shook as she said, "The baby's not breathing." Paramedics arrived within minutes. Matthew was unconscious, his body limp. There were no visible injuries, but something was terribly wrong. He was rushed to Children's Hospital in Boston, placed on life support. Doctors found severe brain swelling, a fractured skull, and bleeding behind his eyes, signs of violent shaking or impact. When Sunil and Deborah arrived, they were told their son's injuries were not consistent with an accident. Someone had hurt him. Matthew died 5 days later. Louise was arrested that night, charged with first-degree murder. The story exploded. An 18-year-old foreign nanny accused of killing a baby in her care. The press called it the trial of the century. Louise insisted she hadn't hurt him. She said she had been rough putting him down, had dropped him onto the bed, but never struck him. She said he went quiet and she panicked, but prosecutors claimed she had lost her temper, that Matthew had been crying, and that she had shaken him violently, slamming his head against something hard. They described shaken baby syndrome, a pattern of trauma seen in infants when anger meets helplessness. The trial lasted 2 months. The courtroom became a battlefield between science and emotion. Doctors testified that Matthew's injuries could only come from severe force. Defense experts argued they could have happened earlier, perhaps days before, from another fall or accident. Louise sat quietly throughout, her hands folded, her face pale. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she looked numb. When she spoke, her voice was soft, too soft for a case filled with so much noise. The jury deliberated for 26 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder, Louise collapsed. Her parents sobbed. The sentence, life in prison, with a minimum of 15 years before parole, but that was not the end. The judge, Hiller Zobel, took an extraordinary step. He reviewed the case himself and decided the jury's verdict was too severe. He reduced the charge to involuntary manslaughter. In his ruling, he wrote, She was immature, not evil. Louise was sentenced to time served 279 days. Then she was freed, deported back to England. The public split in half. In America, outrage. In England, relief. Two countries staring at the same story, seeing two different villains. To this day, the truth remains unclear. Was it a moment of frustration that turned fatal, or a medical tragedy misread as violence? No one will ever know for certain. Deborah Eapen said later, "I lost my son. No verdict will ever change that." Louise returned home to cameras, headlines, and hatred. She tried to start over, studied law, worked as a dance teacher, built a quiet life far from the spotlight. She rarely speaks of what happened. When asked in one rare interview if she forgives herself, she said, "I don't know if I need to. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." Her words linger, a whisper between guilt and denial, because intent doesn't erase consequence, and carelessness can kill as surely as rage. The Apens never saw justice as enough. For them, Matthew's short life became a warning that trust is fragile, and innocence is often destroyed not by monsters, but by ordinary people in ordinary moments. The case of Louise Woodward still divides experts decades later. It is not a story of evil in the traditional sense, but a reminder that tragedy doesn't always need hate. Sometimes it only needs exhaustion, and a moment you can never take back. And while Boston mourned a child lost to confusion and carelessness, thousands of miles away in Moscow, another nanny would commit an act so cruel, so shocking, that even seasoned investigators struggled to describe it aloud. Her name was Gulchekhra Bobokulova, Moscow, Russia. A cold February morning in 2016. Snow fell quietly over the city, soft, silent, the kind of day when the world feels still. On the outskirts, in an ordinary apartment block, a horror was unfolding that would haunt the nation forever. Her name was Gulchekhra Bobokulova, 38 years old, a nanny, a mother, a woman trusted to protect the most innocent among us. She came to Moscow from Uzbekistan, seeking work to support her own family back home. She was quiet, devout, and always polite. Her employers, the Mezdrachev family, thought they were lucky to have her. They trusted her with their two children, and most days nothing seemed wrong. But inside Bobokulova's mind, something had begun to unravel. Neighbors later recalled that she had grown distant. She spoke to herself. She muttered about God, about voices, about a test. Her eyes had lost focus. Her smile never reached her eyes. No one realized how far she had fallen. On February the 29th, the Mezdrachevs left early for work. Their 4-year-old daughter, Anastasia, stayed home with Bobokulova. It was a routine day. Cartoons, breakfast, the gentle rhythm of domestic life. At least, that's how it began. Around 11 a.m., neighbors smelled smoke. Moments later, flames poured from the apartment windows. Firefighters rushed to the scene. Inside, they found a nightmare. The apartment was burned, but the fire wasn't what killed the child. Anastasia's small body lay in her bed, and her head was missing. The police searched frantically for the nanny. She was gone. An hour later, in a crowded Moscow metro station, pedestrians began to scream. A woman dressed in black stood near the entrance, holding a severed child's head in her hands. It was Bobokulova. She shouted verses in Arabic, declaring herself a messenger of God. She said she had killed to avenge the children killed in Syria. She warned that the world must burn. She told police she had waited until the parents left so that they could suffer. The footage was too horrifying to air uncensored. A mother figure, a caretaker, walking calmly through a train station, cradling what should have been love. She was arrested without resistance. Her face remained emotionless as she spoke of angels and war. When asked if she regretted it, she said, "No, it was God's will." Investigators soon discovered that Bobokulova had long suffered from schizophrenia. She had been treated for it years earlier in Uzbekistan, but stopped taking her medication. Her condition had worsened in silence. The family she worked for never knew. In custody, she spoke calmly, reciting prayers, occasionally laughing. Doctors declared her legally insane. She would not face a trial. Instead, she was sent to a psychiatric facility indefinitely. For the Mezdrachev family, there was no justice to be found, only a question that would never be answered. How could the woman who sang lullabies also be the one who took their daughter's life? Russian media called her the Bloody Nanny. But behind the headlines was a deeper tragedy, a system that failed to protect both the family and the woman herself. Bobokulova's illness had gone untreated for years. She had begged for help. No one had listened. In the weeks after the murder, flowers covered the gates of the Mezdrachev apartment block. Parents clutched their children tighter. The sound of laughter in the courtyard vanished. Fear had moved in, and it would not leave. Now, the footage of Bobokulova walking through that metro station remains one of the most disturbing images in modern Russian history. It is not just the violence. It is the calm, the quiet, the absence of rage, as if she had simply fulfilled a duty that existed only in her own mind. Evil in her case was not fueled by greed or envy. It was madness wearing the mask of faith. And madness, when left unchecked, does not need a reason to destroy. For many, her story became a symbol of fear, of the fragility of trust, and of how easily compassion can become a weapon when placed in the wrong hands. A nanny is supposed to be a protector, a guardian of what is most sacred. But on that frozen morning in Moscow, trust became the doorway to horror. The Mezdrachevs never returned to their apartment. They moved away quietly, leaving behind toys, clothes, memories they could never bear to touch again. The hallway where the fire began has been repainted now. The walls look clean, but no color can hide the truth. That evil once stood there, smiling, waiting for the parents to leave. And as Russia tried to make sense of what happened, across the ocean in Florida, another young woman would prove that you don't need madness to murder the ones who trust you, only cruelty disguised as care. Her name was Kristie Falling, Florida, 1971, a place of heat, mosquitoes, and Sunday sermons. A world that seemed peaceful on the surface, but sometimes peace only hides what no one wants to see. Her name was Kristie Falling, born in the small town of Perez. She was poor, awkward, and forgotten long before she became a killer. Her childhood was a blur of neglect, a violent father, a distant mother, and long stretches of hunger and loneliness. She was never really a child. At 9, she began hearing voices. At 12, she dropped out of school. By 14, she was married to a man twice her age. By 16, she was divorced, living alone, and desperate to feel useful to someone, anyone. So, she became a babysitter. To the families who hired her, Kristie seemed shy but kind, a simple girl who smiled politely and never asked for much. No one saw the darkness hiding behind that soft voice. In 1977, she was hired to care for a 2-year-old girl. The mother returned home to find Kristie standing beside the crib, her expression blank. The baby was motionless. Kristie said the child just stopped breathing. The doctor called it sudden infant death syndrome. No one suspected a thing. Over the next few years, it happened again, and again. Tiny coffins, small funerals, and the same explanation every time. The baby just stopped breathing. Kristie moved from family to family, town to town, each time leaving behind another tragedy. The pattern was invisible back then. There were no shared databases, no suspicion that death could travel from one babysitter to another. She told police later that she felt something take over whenever a child cried, that the crying made her dizzy, that she just wanted them to sleep. But what she really wanted was control. By 1981, the bodies had piled up. 6 in total, 5 children, and 1 elderly woman she was hired to care for. Her methods were always the same: a pillow, a blanket, her bare hands. She said she pressed down softly, that she didn't mean to kill them, that it was God's will. In the small towns of northern Florida, rumors began to spread. Doctors whispered, sheriffs compared notes, and finally, someone saw the pattern. Kristie was brought in for questioning. She confessed almost immediately, not out of guilt, but out of confusion. She said she didn't understand why it kept happening, that the devil made her do it. The details she gave were chillingly precise: how she felt their last breath, how she watched the light fade from their eyes, how, afterward, she'd hold them and whisper that it would be okay. There was no mystery left, only horror. She was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. In court, she appeared small, childlike, and emotionless. The prosecution called her a monster without conscience. The defense argued she was insane. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with severe mental illness, borderline intelligence, psychotic episodes, and uncontrollable impulses. But she was ruled competent to stand trial. In 1982, Christine Falling pleaded guilty to 3 murders in exchange for life in prison. She avoided the death penalty, but the judge made it clear she would never be free again. When asked if she understood what she had done, she said quietly, "I guess I just wasn't meant to be around kids." She was 20. Even now, decades later, Christine remains one of the youngest serial killers in American history, a babysitter whose hands took the lives of those she was trusted to protect. In prison, she has told chaplains that she believes the devil still speaks to her, that she's at peace with God now. But peace and forgiveness are not the same thing. And some sins live longer than the sinner. Her case changed the way background checks were handled in Florida. Families began asking harder questions. Trust became harder to give, because once innocence is broken, it never fully returns. The graves of her victims are small, marked only by first names and flowers left by strangers. Children who should have grown up, laughed, lived. Instead, they became the quiet proof that evil can wear the face of a caregiver. Christine Falling's story is one of cruelty born from emptiness. A girl who wanted to feel powerful, who mistook control for love, and who discovered too late that some acts can't be undone. She will die in prison. And when she does, there will be few who remember her name. But for the families she destroyed, the sound of a child crying in the dark will never mean the same thing again. And as Florida tried to forget the babysitter who became a serial killer across the same state, years later, another nanny would pick up where Falling left off. A young woman who claimed she loved the child she killed, and who insisted, until the end, that it was all a tragic mistake. Her name was Clover Boykin, Florida, 1991. A small apartment in the city of Boynton Beach. A crib, a baby monitor. A woman who said she loved the child like her own. Her name was Clover Boykin, 17 years old. A teenager with no family of her own, and a history that read like a cry for help. She had grown up poor, in and out of foster homes, learning early that affection could vanish overnight. Teachers remembered her as quiet, nervous, always desperate to please. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to belong. When she was 16, she met a young couple, Mark and Patricia Jensen, new parents trying to juggle work and their infant daughter, 2-month-old Chelsea. They needed help. Clover needed purpose. It seemed perfect. They trusted her immediately. She was gentle, sweet, always smiling. She would rock Chelsea to sleep, singing softly, telling Patricia that the baby was her little angel. But behind that kindness was something darker, an emptiness Clover couldn't fill. A loneliness that twisted into obsession. Within weeks, her attachment to the baby grew strange. She refused to let anyone else hold Chelsea. She scolded Patricia for doing things wrong. When Mark came home early one evening, he found Clover in tears, rocking the baby and whispering, "She only loves me." Patricia brushed it off. She told herself Clover was just young, inexperienced, a little too emotional. She didn't know how dangerous love could become when it turns possessive. On the night of August the 25th, Patricia left Clover alone with the baby for just a few hours. When she returned, the apartment was silent. Clover sat on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. Chelsea lay motionless in her crib. At first, Clover said nothing. Then she whispered she wouldn't stop crying. Paramedics found bruises on the baby's chest. Her skull fractured. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. Clover's story changed again and again. She said she dropped the baby by accident. Then she said she patted her too hard. Then finally, she admitted she had shaken her. She told detectives, "She kept crying, and I just wanted her to be quiet." In the interrogation room, Clover broke down, crying so hard she could barely breathe. She said she didn't mean to hurt her, that she loved her. But love doesn't leave bruises. Love doesn't break bones. The case shocked Florida. A teenage nanny, barely more than a child herself, charged with the murder of a baby. Reporters called her the babysitter from hell. Psychologists called her emotionally undeveloped. Everyone else called her evil. But the truth, as always, was more complicated. During her trial, defense attorneys painted a picture of a girl raised without affection, abandoned by every adult she'd ever known, desperate to hold on to someone who couldn't leave her. They said she didn't understand death, that when Chelsea went limp in her arms, Clover thought she was sleeping. The prosecution disagreed. They described a pattern, a jealous, unstable girl who resented the baby's parents and wanted to have the child all to herself. They said her motive wasn't insanity, it was control. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. They found her guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. In the courtroom, Clover's expression never changed. No tears, no screams, just quiet. When asked if she had anything to say, she looked at Patricia and said softly, "I'm sorry. I really loved her." Those words echoed through the courtroom like something sacred that had been broken. Because maybe she meant it. Maybe, in her own damaged way, she did love that child. But love without boundaries is just possession wearing a softer name. In prison, Clover became withdrawn. She rarely spoke to other inmates. She told psychologists that she dreamed of the baby every night, that she saw her face when she closed her eyes, that she still sang lullabies in her sleep. Decades later, she remains incarcerated, a woman who never escaped the emotional age of 17. She told one reporter, "I wasn't evil, I just didn't know what love was supposed to feel like." Her words linger, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't those who hate, but those who love too much and too wrongly. The Jensens never had another child. They moved away quietly, leaving behind the nursery, the toys, the life that ended before it began. For them, there was no justice, only survival. And in the years that followed, Florida would see the same tragedy repeated. A pattern of trust betrayed, of caregivers turned killers. Because when grief looks into the face of evil, it often sees something familiar. And while Clover Boykin's case showed the devastation of youth and obsession, the next would expose how even experience and maturity can hide darkness just as deep. Her name was Yoselyn Brady McCarthy.
Week, of course, prosecutors dropped the charges against her. Her attorney says now she's eager to move on with her life.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, January 2013. A quiet winter morning. The kind of morning where snow falls softly over brick streets, where parents hurry through their routines, and trust feels as ordinary as breathing. Inside an apartment on Ash Street, a small birthday balloon floated near the ceiling, a remnant of celebration, a fragile symbol of life just days before it was stolen. Her name was Yoselyn Brady McCarthy, 34 years old, born in County Cavan, Ireland. She came to America in search of opportunity, to work, to send money home, to build a new life one paycheck at a time. She was hardworking, patient, and quiet. To anyone who met her, she was the kind of woman parents prayed for when they hired help. Her employers were the Saber family, Samir, a tech entrepreneur, and his wife, Nada. Together, they adored their 1-year-old daughter, Rayma. Yoselyn had cared for the child for 6 months. She fed her, dressed her, sang to her in a soft Irish lilt. Neighbors saw them walking together, the baby's mittened hand reaching for Yoselyn's scarf, the nanny smiling down, as if she had found a piece of home in that child's laughter. To the Sabirs, Yoselyn wasn't an employee, she was family. But behind her quiet smile, something was crumbling. Yoselyn's visa had long expired. She lived under constant fear of deportation, working illegally, sending money back to Ireland, pretending everything was fine. She was lonely, homesick, and exhausted. And when the crying started, as all babies cry, the sound pierced deeper than anyone knew. Those who knew her said she had a temper that flashed like lightning, gone as quickly as it came, but always dangerous while it lasted. She once told a friend, "The crying just gets inside my head. It doesn't stop. Ever." On January the 14th, Nada left the apartment around 10 in the morning. Rayma was healthy, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Yoselyn was calm, offering to tidy the house while the baby napped. It was the kind of ordinary goodbye that parents have spoken 1,000 times before, never realizing it could be the last. When Nada returned hours later, she found Yoselyn pacing the floor, murmuring prayers. The baby was motionless, her skin pale, her body limp. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They found Rayma barely breathing, her pulse faint. There were no signs of an accident, no fall, no visible bruises. But inside her skull, the damage was catastrophic. She was rushed to Children's Hospital in Boston. Doctors worked for hours, but the truth was clear. Massive bleeding in the brain, retinal hemorrhages, signs of blunt force trauma, the kind of injury seen when a baby is shaken violently or struck against a hard surface. Nada stood outside the emergency room, clutching her husband's hand. waiting for an answer she already knew. Their daughter died the next day. When police questioned Aisling, her story shifted again and again. First, she said Rima just went limp. Then she said she might have fallen. Then, that the baby hit her head on something. None of it made sense. She was arrested 3 days later, charged with first-degree murder. The headlines screamed her name: the Irish nanny, the baby killer. 2 nations watched the story unfold: Ireland defending her innocence, America demanding justice. Prosecutors said she had lost her temper, that the crying had pushed her past the edge, that she had shaken the child until she stopped moving. They described the science of shaken baby syndrome, force so violent it tears blood vessels inside the skull. The defense fought back hard. They brought in experts who claimed the injuries could have come from an earlier fall or a rare bleeding disorder. They said Aisling was innocent, that the system wanted someone to blame. As the case dragged on, the medical evidence began to unravel. A new review found signs that Rima might have been sick before that day: infection, fragile blood vessels, a body already weakened. Suddenly, certainty turned to doubt. After 2 long years of investigation, the prosecution quietly dropped all charges. The words came coldly from the bench: the case is dismissed. But for the Sabirs, there was no closure. Their daughter was still gone, her first words never spoken, her future erased. Aisling was released. She returned to Ireland in silence, her name forever marked by suspicion. Reporters followed her for months. She hid from cameras, moved homes, stopped answering the phone. In one rare letter to a friend, she wrote, "I pray for her every night, but I don't know what I'm praying for, forgiveness or proof that I didn't do it." To this day, the truth remains a shadow. Was she guilty? Was she careless? Or was she just another woman crushed under the weight of tragedy and circumstance? In Cambridge, the apartment has long since been rented to another family. Children's laughter fills the same rooms, but the walls remember. The sound of a baby's cry that ended in silence. Aisling Brady McCarthy's story is not one of clear evil, but of something more haunting: uncertainty. The space between innocence and guilt, between love and violence, between what we know and what we tell ourselves to survive. For some, she's a murderer who escaped justice. For others, she's a victim of hysteria and bad science. But for one family, the only truth that matters is that their daughter is gone. And while Boston struggled with the weight of doubt, in another country, a different kind of nanny was about to leave innocence behind. Not for money, not for anger, but for something far more calculated. Kristie Flood, Sandy Springs, Georgia. Trust is one of the purest things in the world. A parent hands over their child, believing that the person watching them will protect what matters most. But on one December afternoon in Georgia, that trust was shattered, and a story about a playground accident turned into a murder investigation. This is the case of Kristie Flood, a babysitter whose lies unraveled to reveal something far darker than anyone imagined. It began on December 9th, 2020, in Sandy Springs, just outside Atlanta. Flood was 29 years old, a mother herself, someone who had watched her friend's little girl many times before. Her name was Autumn Horvat, a bright, curious 2-year-old who loved to dance and laugh. To her parents, Flood was not a stranger. She was a friend, someone they trusted completely. That morning seemed ordinary. Flood took Autumn to a nearby playground. She sent cheerful texts and photos to the child's mother, Autumn smiling, bundled in her pink jacket, sitting at the top of the slide. Hours later, that smile was gone. By the end of the day, the little girl was dead. When police arrived at the hospital, Flood told them the same story she had told Autumn's parents. She said the child had gone down the slide, hit her head, and lost consciousness. She said it was an accident, a tragedy. But detectives had questions. The injuries didn't match the story. They were too severe, too deliberate. The medical examiner's report would later reveal the truth. Blunt force trauma to the head, massive internal bleeding, evidence of assault. This was no playground accident. This was murder. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a timeline filled with deception. Phone records showed that Flood hadn't called for help right away. Instead, she spent more than an hour searching the internet on her phone, looking up phrases like, "What if someone hits a toddler too hard on the head?" and "How do you know if a head injury is fatal?" By the time emergency services were called, it was already too late. Detectives searched Flood's phone and found something even more disturbing. Photos and videos taken of Autumn's injuries before she died. images no human being should ever take, let alone keep. Prosecutors would later describe them as trophies of cruelty. When confronted with the evidence, Flood changed her story. She said the child fell in the bathtub. Then she said she fell off the bed. Each lie collapsed under the weight of the next. Finally, she admitted to striking Autumn. Her reason? She was fussy. In December of 2020, Kristie Flood was arrested and charged with malice murder, felony murder, and cruelty to children in the first degree. She sat in her mugshot with blank eyes, her expression neither angry nor remorseful, just empty. At the time, Autumn's parents were left broken. They had trusted their friend with their baby girl. They had believed the stories, the texts, the photos. They had believed that kindness meant safety. Now they were left with silence and 1,000 unanswerable questions. The case dragged on for years as Flood's defense team delayed proceedings. But in February of 2024, she finally stood before the court and entered a plea. She admitted to killing 2-year-old Autumn Horvat. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In court, she said little. No apology, no explanation. Only a faint whisper as she was led away. I didn't mean it. But intent doesn't heal the wounds she caused, and it doesn't bring Autumn back. During sentencing, the prosecutor told the jury, "There are no monsters under the bed. Sometimes they stand right next to it." And that's what makes this case so haunting. There were no strangers, no kidnappings, no warnings, just a familiar face, a friend, and a betrayal so complete that it defies understanding. After the trial, Autumn's family released a short statement. They said their daughter's laughter still echoes in their home, that her favorite song still plays every morning, and that no punishment will ever match the loss of what was taken. The playground where Autumn spent her last day has become a small memorial. Parents bring flowers, stuffed animals, and ribbons. The slide, once a symbol of joy, now stands as a quiet reminder of how trust can be broken in an instant. Kristie Flood's story is one of deception, cruelty, and the ultimate betrayal of love. But it's also a warning, a reminder that evil rarely looks like a stranger in the dark. Sometimes it looks like a friend, sometimes it babysits your child, and sometimes it smiles while it lies.
And Brandon said, "No, police don't drop the knife," and he was saying, "I'm gonna kill her, I'm gonna kill her."
Her name is Juliana Perez Magalhaes, Herndon, Virginia. It was February 24th, 2023, a quiet Friday morning in the suburban town of Herndon, Virginia. The sun was pale, the streets still. Inside a large, comfortable house on a cul-de-sac, a family prepared for the weekend ahead. A husband, his wife, their young daughter, and the live-in au pair who had been hired to help care for the child. By the time evening came, 2 people were dead. And the woman they trusted to help protect them would be at the center of a murder plot unlike anything the county had seen. The woman was Juliana Perez Magalhaes, a Brazilian au pair in her early 20s. She had arrived in the United States seeking a new life. Her English was improving, she seemed eager and dependable. She moved into the home of Christine Banfield and Brendan Banfield, a pediatric intensive care nurse and an IRS special agent respectively, and their 4-year-old daughter. In the summer of 2021, the Banfields hired Juliana. All appeared well. But behind the calm facade, something far darker was being planned. By August of 2022, prosecutors say, the relationship between Juliana and Brendan Banfield shifted. He began an affair with the young woman he employed. And not just an affair, but a scheme. Brendan allegedly told Juliana that he wanted his wife gone. He allegedly set in motion a web of deception, luring an unsuspecting man into their home under the guise of a sexual encounter with fatal consequences. Juliana, prosecutors say, played a key role. She would impersonate his wife online. She would help orchestrate a fatal scenario. And on that February morning, the plan was executed. The house was quiet just after dawn. Brendan Banfield, according to court filings, had created an online profile for his wife on a fetish website. He contacted a man named Joseph Ryan, a martial arts enthusiast who liked live-action role-play. Juliana used the wife's identity in encrypted messages to arrange a meeting. On that morning, Ryan was invited to the home, believing he had engaged in a consensual scenario. He arrived. What he encountered, investigators say, was a trap. Juliana took the family's daughter out early under cover of a trip, leaving the house quiet. Then Ryan entered and was confronted. Brendan Banfield returned. Shots rang out. One shot struck Ryan in the head. His body lay nearby. In a bedroom, Christine was found with multiple stab wounds to the neck. Juliana called 911. Her voice panicked. She said there was an intruder, but detectives were suspicious from the start. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a chilling framework. The daughter had been left in the basement. Juliana impersonated the mother on the phone. The door was left unlocked. The intruder narrative began to collapse. Prosecutors alleged that Brendan and Juliana staged the whole scene to look like a home invasion, so that Ryan could be framed as the attacker. Blood splatter analysis, phone logs, digital footprints told a different story. On October 19, 2023, Juliana was arrested and charged. The following September, a grand jury indicted Brendan Banfield on 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. But Juliana opted for a different path. On October 29, 2024, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter in return for cooperation with authorities. In court, she admitted that she fired the fatal shot as part of the ruse. She told investigators she had reservations, that she asked if the plan would be carried out, but she felt compelled to comply. She said Brendan provided the gun, instructed her at the range, and told her what to do. No, she said, when asked if she was innocent. Yes, she replied, when asked if she was guilty. The families of the victims were shattered. Christine Banfield, celebrated as a nurse who helped children, had come home to die. Joseph Ryan, enthusiastic and kind, a martial arts student with a gentle heart, had been lured into a nightmare. Their futures ended in one house. Juliana's cooperation means she may receive credit for time served, provided she continues to assist investigators in the ongoing trial against Brendan Banfield. Her sentence remains to be determined. For Herndon, the quiet town, the shock ran deep. Doors were locked. Neighborhood walks stopped. Parents pointed to the case as proof that terror can hide behind friendly faces. The nanny, the neighbor, the trusted person. Juliana's story is not simply a tale of betrayal. It is a lesson. One that holds a mirror to our assumptions about safety, loyalty, and identity. She arrived as a caretaker. She became accomplice. And she may walk free if the deal holds. The husband may face life or death sentences, but the 2 lives that vanished, Christine and Joseph, cannot be restored. If this story teaches anything, it is this. Evil does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, in soft voices, behind smiles, and in the quiet corners of homes we believe to be safe. While in Virginia this case came to a grueling end, across the ocean in Spain, another caregiver would take that final step, not out of obsession, but out of revenge. Her name was Elena Perez. Madrid, Spain, 2015. The city glowed under the evening sun, families walking home from parks, children's laughter spilling through narrow streets. In a quiet apartment on the edge of the city, a woman stood by a crib, watching a sleeping child. To anyone passing by, it looked peaceful. But peace that night was a mask. Her name was Elena Perez, 36 years old, a nanny. A mother herself once, though no one knew what had become of her child. She had been hired by the Torres family, affluent, kind, the kind of people who believed that generosity could build loyalty. They paid well, treated her with respect, and trusted her with everything they loved most, their 2-year-old daughter, Lucia. For months, everything seemed normal. Elena was polite, soft-spoken, dependable. She taught the child Spanish lullabies, cooked simple meals, and kept the apartment immaculate. The family adored her. They said she felt like part of the home. But inside, Elena was drowning. She had debts she couldn't pay, a family she couldn't support, and a bitterness that grew quietly with each passing week. She envied her employers, their happiness, their stability, their effortless comfort. She once told a neighbor, "They live like angels, and I live like a ghost." By the summer of 2015, she had begun to unravel. She argued with Mrs. Torres over small things, a stain, a schedule, a missed payment that never existed. When she thought no one was listening, she muttered to herself, "They think they're better than me." But what began as resentment was about to twist into something far darker. On the evening of August the 11th, Mrs. Torres left for dinner with her husband. Lucia stayed behind with Elena. It was supposed to be just another night. Cartoons, dinner, bedtime, stories. When the couple returned hours later, the apartment was dark, too quiet. They called for Elena, no answer. They called for Lucia, still nothing. And then they saw it, a light flickering from the bathroom. The door was open just enough to show a reflection in the mirror. Elena stood inside, her clothes soaked, her hands shaking. On the floor behind her was the small, still body of Lucia. The scream that followed echoed through the entire building. Neighbors rushed to help, but it was already too late. The child had drowned. Elena whispered that the voices told her to do it. Then she smiled, a small, unsettling smile that no one ever forgot. When police arrived, she confessed almost immediately, not with guilt, but with something closer to relief. She told detectives, "They needed to feel what I feel. Now they will." The city froze. Bain had known tragedy before, but not like this. Not a nanny murdering a child in a home that had welcomed her like family. At her trial, prosecutors painted her as cold, vindictive, consumed by jealousy. They said she had planned it, waited for the parents to leave, then acted out of spite. The defense claimed mental illness, voices, hallucinations, a lifetime of untreated trauma. Psychiatrists examined her for months. Their conclusion was chilling. Elena was not insane. She knew exactly what she was doing. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. Guilty of first-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison. Mrs. Torres fainted. Her husband held her as cameras flashed. And through it all, Elena stared straight ahead, expressionless. In prison, she wrote letters that confused even her own lawyers. She spoke of redemption, of finding peace, of hearing the child's laughter in her dreams. She said, "I did not kill her. I set her free from this cruel world." It was delusion disguised as faith, the same disease that spreads quietly through people who believe pain makes them righteous. She died in custody 3 years later, an apparent suicide. Her cellmate told reporters that she had been whispering to herself the night before, asking for forgiveness from a little girl named Lucia. The Torres family never spoke publicly again. They left Madrid, sold the apartment, and disappeared from the public eye. All that remains is a small plaque left anonymously at the building's gate, a single name carved into marble, Lucia. Elena Perez's story is a reminder that evil doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it wears the face of help. Sometimes it walks quietly through your home, carrying dinner plates, smiling softly, waiting for the perfect silence to destroy everything. Trust is the most dangerous currency we spend. We give it freely. We assume goodness where we want to see it. And every now and then, we pay for it with blood. Elena Perez believed she had been wronged by life. She thought tragedy would balance the scales. But in truth, she simply proved the same cruel law that ties all these stories together. Hurt people don't always seek healing. Sometimes they seek reflection. And while Spain mourned the little girl taken by the one hired to protect her on the other side of the world, another caregiver would make headlines. Not because she killed a toddler, but because she tried to, and in the process killed its grandfather. Her name was Samantha Booth. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, a quiet Michigan suburb, a toddler sleeping upstairs, and a trusted nanny watching over her. Her name was Samantha Ray Booth, 35 years old. To the family, she was part of the household, reliable, polite. She had cared for that little girl for almost 2 years. There were no signs of danger, no warning of what was about to happen. The toddler's mother was out of town. When she couldn't reach the nanny by phone that night, she asked her father, David Ong, to stop by and check on things. He was 83 years old, a gentleman, a grandfather, the kind of person who still believed that kindness was never wasted. He arrived at the house on Sheridan Drive in Royal Oak, expecting to find a sleeping child and a tired nanny. Instead, he stepped into a nightmare. At first, everything was quiet. The lights glowed faintly from the kitchen. The air was still. He called out Samantha's name. No answer. He moved through the rooms, searching for his granddaughter. And then, from the basement, a noise, a struggle, a sound that didn't belong in a family home. When David descended the stairs, he came face to face with a woman he thought he knew. Samantha Booth was standing there, her eyes wild, her clothes streaked with blood. In her hand, a screwdriver. What happened next was sudden and violent. Police later said she attacked him without a word, driving the tool into his body again and again. The man who came to check on his granddaughter never made it back upstairs. Moments later, the toddler's uncle arrived to help. He had also been unable to reach Samantha. When he entered the basement, he found his father's body on the floor and Booth turning toward him, the screwdriver still in her hand. He barely escaped. Grabbing the child, he ran from the house as she lunged at him. Neighbors saw him sprinting into the street, the little girl in his arms, while behind him, Samantha Booth staggered outside, naked, covered in blood, screaming. Police arrived minutes later. They found Booth in the yard, incoherent, ranting, her hands trembling. The screwdriver was still nearby. Inside, David Ong was gone. He had been stabbed multiple times. There were no drugs or alcohol in his system, just the quiet decency of a man who had tried to protect his family. Samantha Booth was taken into custody on the spot. She offered no real resistance, but her words chilled the officers who heard them. According to reports, she muttered, "I did it. It was too easy." Investigators searched her belongings. Inside her purse, they found marijuana and what they believed were psychedelic mushrooms. It was unclear whether she had taken them that night, but her erratic state left little doubt that something inside her had broken. Neighbors described the family as kind and close. They said David Ong was the sort of man who smiled at everyone, who fixed things for people without being asked. The tragedy of his death rippled through the community like shockwaves. No one could understand how a trusted caregiver, a woman paid to protect, could suddenly turn into a killer. In court, prosecutors charged Booth with first-degree premeditated murder, assault with intent to murder, child abuse, and resisting police. She showed little emotion as the charges were read. When asked if she understood, she nodded once and stared at the floor. For investigators, the case raised more questions than answers. There had been no history of violence, no sign of mental illness severe enough to predict this. Friends described her as quiet, calm, a little withdrawn, but never dangerous. So, what happened that night? Was it a psychotic break, a drug-induced hallucination, or something darker, a hidden rage finally released? The toddler, miraculously, was unharmed, but she will grow up with a story that no child should ever have to hear. The night her grandfather died trying to protect her. The house where it happened remains a crime scene of silence. Neighbors drive by slower now. They look toward the basement window and they remember. Because in places like this, quiet, safe neighborhoods, evil isn't supposed to exist. But sometimes, it hides behind familiar faces. For the Ong family, there will be no simple answers. A man of faith and kindness is gone. A woman they trusted is behind bars, facing a lifetime in prison, perhaps more. And a child will grow up never remembering the night that changed everything. The story of Samantha Booth isn't just about one act of violence. It's about trust, how fragile it is, how quickly it can shatter. A family opened their door to a caretaker. They gave her their confidence. They gave her their child. And in one night, it was all destroyed. Maybe drugs played a role. Maybe madness did. Maybe we'll never know. But what we do know is that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it sings to a child, sometimes it tucks them in, and sometimes it waits, quietly, until someone opens the door and walks down the stairs. This is the story of Samantha Booth, the nanny who killed the grandfather, a moment of unthinkable violence that left a family broken, a community shaken, and a question that still haunts everyone who's heard it. How well do we ever really know the people we trust with what we love most? What happens when obsession wears the face of care? When protection becomes control? When love demands ownership? She was the final echo in a long, tragic line of caretakers who, crossed the boundary between nurture and annihilation. The final proof that evil does not need fangs or fury. Sometimes it smiles, folds laundry, and says goodnight. They were the ones we trusted. The ones who held our children, who promised safety, who smiled as they betrayed it. They were not born monsters. They were made by jealousy, by delusion, by loneliness, by rage. They were trusted to protect, and instead, they destroyed. And so, the question lingers, how well do we really know the people we let into our homes, into our families, into our lives? Because trust is fragile. It can save us, or it can kill us. If you've watched until the end, take a breath, remember their victims, and never forget that sometimes the most ordinary smile can hide the darkest heart. This is the story of the most evil nannies who destroyed families when trust led to tragedy. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And remember, some of the most terrifying monsters aren't found in nightmares. They live next door,